Good times and great music at 2 RFM 103.7. As we take a look at things happening in the world of science, we do that with John O'Connor. He's our professor from the University of Newcastle. And John, today, almost a little bit of history. We're kind of sort of blending into a different discipline here, but something that is, I guess, one of those landmarks that really we hold in high affection for, Stonehenge.
Where modern science meets ancient history. That's right. Stonehenge, everyone I'm sure has seen a picture of it. It's one of those iconic ancient monuments. It's roughly 4,000 to 5,000 years old. It's really outstanding. I've visited a couple of times, and you come over the hill on the motorway and you see it in the distance and go, oh, gee, that's not so special.
Is that it?
And then you pull in the car park and you walk up and you walk around the path and go, oh, yeah, it's all right. But in 1980, I was there on Midsummer's Day, and they allow the so-called Druids onto the site. So I actually walked amongst the stones, and it's so different when you stand there and look up at them when you're that close. It really is a phenomenal structure, and it's been studied for a long time. It's and in fact, this year is the centenary of a study that was published about what's called the blue stones. Now, before I talk about blue stones, let's just look at the structure. There are these really big stones on the outside, which are called sarsens, and they're huge. They're tens of tons, and they came from about 20 kilometres away. Pretty impressive, for me, were really impressive. So they're the outside. Then there's an inner ring, which are different stones, and if they have a slightly bluish colour. Blue if they're wet or if they're freshly broken. And it was 100 years ago that a British geologist, Herbert Thomas, determined that these blue stones came from Wales, Preseli in Wales, which is...
That's a little bit further than 20 k's away.
Over 200 kilometres away. Now, these are still big stones. Imagine. I don't know how they move them. In fact, people have worked out how they could possibly move them. Yeah, why would you go that far to get blue stones instead of just getting them 20 kilometres away, which, okay, they weren't blue. So anyway, he collectively decided that this inner ring of blue stones came from Preseli, and that's fine. In fact, he identified one particular area in Wales. More recent researchers identified a slightly different place. Modern science can actually so precisely characterise these stones, they could actually get to the quarry that they came from. Not even just the general area, that hill over there.
So what makes, this might seem a silly question, but what makes a stone that's in one quarry slightly different to what's over the composition of the stone?
It's a chemical composition, that's right, because it's just the makeup of the different elements. In fact, we'll come back to this in a moment. But it's the makeup of the different elements in the crystalline structure. So, because even though it's in the one block area, it will have had slightly different temperature effects, and therefore the crystals will be slightly different size, all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot that science can characterise in these stones. But there's one of these stones in this inner ring, which was called the blue stones, which wasn't blue. It was a sandstone, and it was sort of greyish, and it's called the altar stone. And he had sort of collectively put it in with the blue stones and said, yeah, it came from Wales. But more recently, it's been studied by a group from Aberystwyth University in Wales, and they're challenging the idea that it came from Wales, because they've gone through this characterisation process, looked at the composition, the isotope ratios, concentration of various elements, and they can't find anywhere in Wales that has a sandstone which has that composition. And then they searched a bit further afield. They've gone into the Midlands in England, all around Wales, and they can come to the conclusion now that it probably doesn't come from that area, and they've actually got to start searching further afield. And they think maybe it's come from further north, although they've got no evidence for that yet. Although there is a link to further north. There's a place in Scotland called Skara Brae, and it's a village, you might have seen it. It's all made of stone. It's on the cliffside. It was only discovered, I think, about 100 years ago after a big storm washed away all the soil. But it's a really impressive little village. It's in a ring, and all the walls are made of stone, and and there's evidence that that was built before Stonehenge, and there is some evidence that perhaps the people from there moved down to the Stonehenge area. So that's still very speculative, but certainly that is the area. But why does he know that this isn't from Wales, this piece of sandstone? The killing point, or the deciding point, is it's got too much barium in it.
Oh, of course, it's your barium levels. That's the problem.
It's about 1 part per 1,000 of it is barium, whereas in Wales and in the other areas they investigated is a much lower concentration. So it can just be one element, but they look at various elements like barium, strontium, lead ratios, uranium isotope ratios. There are various things they can look at that actually give them a characteristic, and they can look at where that rocks with that characteristic exist, and from that they can determine whether that rock came from there or from somewhere else.
And then once they figure out how far away it is, I mean, if we keep throwing this further afield, we'll either end up with Greece or Australia. But then of course there's the big question that we really need to be answered once we figure out where. And that's why.
Why, yes. And in fact, they've also, it's not only the stones that they've been doing these measurements on. It was a place where they sacrificed animals for feasts. People came from miles around, in fact, perhaps hundreds of miles around, because they've actually found the bones and the teeth of the animals that were sacrificed there and part of feasts didn't come from there. They can tell from the isotope ratios they came from much further afield. So it was a big gathering point. Of course, with a construction that size, you've got to have a lot of people involved. But so it's showing how important it was to Stone Age England.
Very interesting stuff, John. As always, a pleasure. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Mark.
There he is, our Professor of Science from the University of Newcastle, John O'Connor, taking a look at Stonehenge today and how far did those rocks come. It's those barium levels, always the barium levels. 2NURFM 103.7.
A broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.